Oh, and welcome to another stream today. So, what we will do today is that we want to explore how we can decouple components from side effects. So, what do I mean by that? So, a side effect, typically in a Vue application or in a front-end application, is an API request, for example. So, anything that triggers a state change outside of the component can be considered a side effect, or doesn't even have to be a state change. Any change that is triggered outside of the scope of a component is basically a side effect. And today we are going to focus on API requests as side effects, and we want to decouple our components from those side effects. And the reason why we want to do this is because, first of all, components without side effects are easier to understand, they are simpler. And second, components without side effects are very easy to test, and that's also great. Okay, but yeah, I have to add a disclaimer here, I guess. So, first of all, what we are doing today is a concept, a very rough concept, and I guess it's quite over-engineered. So if you think, yeah, but why do I need that? You probably don't need it. But for bigger projects, and if you feel the pain this addresses, then this can be a potential solution, at least after some fine-tuning. So, and the second disclaimer is that what I show you today is a very simple demo, because basically this is a dilemma in showing new technologies or new concepts, that if the concept solves a very complex problem, then a simple demo is basically not really the natural occurrence of such a solution. So what I show you today is not meant for very simple applications, but it's easier to demonstrate the basic principles on simple or relatively simple code, because if we have a complex concept and also very complex implementation code, then I think it's very hard to follow. So yeah, so basically the simple application we are building today, or I show you today, would be much, much easier and much, much simpler without an over-engineered solution like that. But yeah, it's just to demonstrate the basic concept. Okay, so I guess before we start with the actual code, before we take a look at the code, I show you a very simple concept of what we want to build. So imagine we have a shopping list component or a shopping list entity. Maybe start with the entities. Let's say we have a thing called shopping list, then we have a thing called line item, and we have a thing called product, for example. So imagine in the database, those are the database tables, for example. Maybe we have a shopping list table, and then we have a line item table or line items table and a products table. And those are the basic entities, I want to call them, in our simple application. And a shopping list can have multiple line items, and the line item can have one product. So shopping list, one to many line items, or maybe even many to many, maybe multiple shopping lists can also have multiple line items, but it's not really important right now for us. For us, it's important that a shopping list can have multiple line items and a line item has a product. So those are the basic entities of our application. So, and when we go to the view level, so this is basically the data storage level or the data persistence level. And when we go to the view component level, let's see, in Vue, we group them by the base entity, which is the shopping list. So we have those are now components. So we have a shopping list component and a shopping list line item component, and a shopping list product component. Okay, those are now our components, and we need some more components to render our Vue application. So at the top, we start with the app component, and our app component can have multiple page components or renders multiple page components. Like, for example, we have page home component. And in this case, like, let's say we have also a page shopping list component, which renders the basic layout with the header and all the stuff. And the shopping list component itself renders only the shopping list. Okay, so this is something like that. So let's do it manually. Yeah, so this is basically the hierarchy, the component hierarchy of our component. We have the app at the root level, a page shopping list component, the shopping list component, a shopping list line item component, and a shopping list product component. Okay, so now here is the thing. The shopping list component is responsible, or could be, so we could implement this the following way. The shopping list component could make an API request to our backend and fetch a shopping list, and the API also returns all the line items connected with this shopping list entity, and also all the products for all the line items. So the shopping list component makes the request to the API. Okay, so this component has a side effect if we do it that way. Let's add the API. So something like this. Okay, so shopping list fetches. The shopping list fetches. Oh, nice clean arrow. The shopping list makes a GET request and fetches all the line items and all the products and also the shopping list entity itself. Okay, so one component, one side effect, because we trigger a fetch request to the API. Okay, so now the shopping list line item component, in here we want to change the quantity. So let's say on our shopping list we have something like bread. So we want to buy bread, and we want to buy one bread or two breads. And so if we change the quantity, we must somehow again trigger an API request, because we want to also persist this change of the quantity. So let's say in this case we make another API request directly from this component. This time it's a put request or a patch request. So again, side effect, patch request, we change the quantity, and now we have two components. And again, this second component here also has a side effect. So all of those two shopping list components have side effects. And now let's imagine the product shopping list component. In here, we want to be able to change the name of the product, for example. So as I said, we have a line item bread. This was not really correct. So the line item is basically, the line item contains information like the quantity, for example. Yeah, basically that's it. So the line item contains the quantity and then a reference to the product, and the product contains the product name, for example. So we have a line item for the bread product and the bread product is a product. So the line item has quantity and the reference to the product, and the product is the product bread, so has the name bread, for example. Now we want to be able to change the name of the product, okay? So again, another arrow here, and again a patch request to change the name. Okay, so we have, so all of those three components now have side effects. Okay, so what's the problem with that? First of all, when we trigger, so that's not the case for all side effects, but like I said, the most common side effect in Vue components, I guess, are API requests. So the thing with API requests is, first of all, they are async. So imagine we going to the shopping list page and we want to load our shopping list. Excuse me. Sorry. We want to load our shopping list, then we have to wait until this request succeeds. Because of that, we need some kind of loading state probably, because we don't want to show a blank page, or maybe we want, but maybe we also want to show a nice loading spinner, for example. Okay, so we have to deal with the loading state. That makes the component already more complex than it should be. The next thing is API requests can fail. So we have to deal with that. So in this component now we have the loading logic. So we need to wait until the request is finished. And we also need to handle errors because, as I said, API requests can and will fail. So another thing we have to include in this shopping list component, but not only the shopping list component, because also the shopping list line item makes an API request. So also this API request takes some time, so we need to show some loading state or something like that. And again, this API request can fail, so we need to deal with the failing API request as well. So again, makes this component also more complicated because we have to deal with the loading state and we have to deal with a potential error state. And the same is true for the last component as well. So I guess you see where I'm coming from. So having side effects makes our components more complicated. And this was only from the implementation part, but also when we want to test those components. I mean, in this example, those are very simple components. There's not a lot to test here, but as I said at the beginning, those are simple components because this is a demo and I try to demonstrate this concept with rather simple components. But in the real world, those might be more complex components with quite complex logic, like complex validation rules and stuff like that. And if you have side effects, testing those is harder because you have to mock those side effects. Okay, so how can we solve this? Let's stay in this drawing mode again. I think it's easier to understand it in here. Okay, so the way I want to solve it is by moving all the side effects into one component. So I hope I remember this correctly how I did it, but otherwise we will see it in the code. It's something like that. So we add a new component. This makes it a little bit more complex, like the original solution, because we have one additional component, but in situations where this concept is useful, it's better to have this component more than to deal with all the side effects in all those other components. Okay, so now we have one additional component, and now we want to make all components in this container component. So that this container component pattern is rather old, like this comes from the React world and is somewhat deprecated again in the React world, but we will do things a little differently. So it's not the same container component approach you might know, or it's a tuned version or yeah, like let's say an over-engineered version of this pattern. But our goal is that this container component now is responsible for all the side effects. So only in this component we will have side effects, and all those other components are completely free of side effects. Okay, how can we do this? We could now, let's imagine we change the name of our product. So we want to rename bread to butter, for example. Then we could emit an event, like an update event, for example. Oh, let's give it a name, update. But yeah, we are only in this shopping list line item component, and then we have to basically pass it through again, like again. Then in here we have to call it update product, because we can also update the shopping list line item, and if we call it only update, it would be confusing. And in here, then we have the update product again, but also the update. Oh, no, that's wrong. Like, yeah, update product. Yeah, no, it was correct. Like also the update line item, and here we have an update, yeah, and so on. Okay, so quite complicated. And imagine we adding more layers here, then we have to add more. So we have to pass through the events one level deeper, and yeah, it's quite confusing. So not a good solution at all. So let's remove those again. We don't want to do this. It's a bad solution, and I did this in production apps, and it's not great. Okay, but what's the alternative? So first of all, just to be clear, here is like the GET request, and also all the batch requests for like line items and products, and also the shopping list. But the point is, only one component is responsible for the side effects. But yeah, there's still the problem how we deal with changes in product, how the shopping list container knows that a product has to change. And how we can solve this is with scoped slots. So instead of importing the shopping list line item component from within the shopping list component and the shopping list product component from within the shopping list line item component, we can remove those errors here. Okay, and now we import, or this one was correct. So, but we can import all the other ones from here. Something like that. Okay, so, and also this one, like this. So we can import all our components from within the container component and pass them in as slots to the shopping list and the product to the shopping list line item. And then we can listen to the events in here, basically, like that. It gets a little confusing here, but I hope you get the point. So like now we can listen to those update events from directly within the list container. Okay. And that's basically the concept on a theoretical level, but let's take a look at the code. Let's open the code real quick, and let's see how do we start. Let's start with the outermost component, with the shopping list product component. And it's a very simple demo application, so we only print out the product name in here. So the template, we only see the name. Like in the previous example, it would be bread or butter. And the component in itself is extremely simple. So it's just the props and nothing else. And we only print out the name. Okay, because it's simple because it's a demo application and I want it to be simple, but it would be not more complex, really not more complex if it was a real example, because we probably just have a couple of props more and maybe a computed property here and there, but not really anything else. And the first special thing is now we also have the error and loading components in here. Like this is the regular component that we render if we have a name. And in case we're still loading data, then we have a separate loading component. And this loading component, because we can only have one template, we use render functions here. But a loading component usually is pretty simple, or maybe we even use a standard loading component in here. So for example, we could import loading spinner in here, and this is some default loading spinner component, and then we could just either re-export the loading component in here as the loading component, or render it in some special way like that. Okay, and we also have an error component. So as I said before, what makes this coupled version complicate, or what makes the side effect versions of the Vue components so complicated is that we have to deal with those error states and so on. And maybe in your application you do something like if, and then you maybe have like something like the state, or something like is loading or something like that. First tip, use state and equals loading or something like that, because then you can't have multiple states that are mutually exclusive. So like if you use is loading and is error, for example, then both can be true, and this is probably not the best. But if you have a state equals and like loading, and in this case you do stuff like loading, and in the real app you probably have a loading spinner component or something like that. But the way I did it for the longest time was something like that, like with this if, and then have a state in here and handle it in the template. And this makes it more complicated. I mean, it's not a lot, but still it adds up. So in each of those components, having a loading if and an error if, and maybe some other states for more complex situations. In this case, you simply render different components. It's rather straightforward, I'd say. Okay, and the next component is the shopping list line item component. It's German still. Let's change it, quantity like that. Okay. This is a little bit more complex, but it's not really complex. It's just a little bit more stuff in here. So like the line item has a quantity, and we can select the quantity and change it. Like in this case, we can change, we can choose 1 to 4. And on change, we emit an update event, and we pass the property name, like the quantity in this case, the value of the select field. And in here we have a slot now, a scoped slot. So first of all, it's a named scoped slot, quite a mouthful. So this slot has the name product, and we pass a property product to it. And this is the product entity, which we get as data, as property for a shopping list line item. So as I said at the beginning, a line item has a reference to the product. In this case, it's a resolved reference, so we get the product entity and the quantity. And the product, we pass it through to the product slot, and this product slot, so this named slot here, this scoped named slot, as you can imagine, is supposed to get filled with the shopping list product component that we saw earlier. But other than that, also a pretty straightforward component. So only some props, really no logic at all. Simply a select field, and yeah, we emit the the updated data. So not much going on in here as well. And again, we have the error and loading components in here. Okay, so this was the shopping list line item. So the next one is the shopping list component. And in the shopping list component, we simply render a list of line items. And again, we use a named scoped slot. In this case, the name is line item because we want to pass the line item component as a slot content in here. And also we use, as I said, we use the scoped slot feature and pass the line item property, the value of the line item or the line item object as a property to the scoped slot. Okay, and in here again, we simply have props, and other than that, nothing special in here. And again, our error and loading components. Okay, so now comes the magic, the shopping list container component. And this is where it gets somewhat complicated because the scoped slot feature is not really the most straightforward thing, I guess, to understand. And as everything, it gets more complicated when we nest it, and we nested 3 levels here. So yeah, bear with me. Hope we can work through it together. So first thing we notice, we don't have like a simple shopping list or a shopping list line item component in here, but with data variants. We will look into this in the next step. But first, let's try to understand what's going on here with this nested scoped slots. Okay, we've seen that the shopping list component has a line item slot, and in the line item slot we pass the line item object as a property. And this is what we are retrieving here. So here we get the line item property. And why this maybe is a little bit complicated is because we have a loop, a for loop on the slot. So this component in here, this shopping list line item with data component, is repeated for whatever amount of line items we have. So if we have 3 line items, this is rendered 3 times. And this line item object changes every iteration. Okay, and now we pass the line item as a default data prop to the WithData component. And if we go back to the line item component, we see there is no WithData property. This WithData property comes from this WithData variant, which we will see in the next step. But let's just take a look at the last slot here. So the last slot is the product slot in the shopping list line item component, and in here we pass again the product object, or the product object is passed to the slot, and here we retrieve it and pass it to the WithData variant of the component as default data. Okay, so what's this WithData thing? Let's take a look. Here we can see we import all the exports. We import all the exports from the component. So like in the line item component, we have 3 exports. We have this error component, the loading component, and of course the default export, which is the component itself. And we do this for all those 3 components we've seen earlier. And then we have an object with like a key default and then a key or a property error and a property loading. Okay, shopping list components is an object with a property default, a property error, and a property loading. Same with those other imports here. Let's ignore the model for a second. That will be the next step. And now we have a WithData helper function. And into this WithData helper function, we pass the model, which we see in the next step, and the components. So let's take a look what the WithData helper function does. But what we can already see is that here we create the the WithData variant of the shopping list component, for example. So let's go into the WithData helper function. The WithData helper function retrieves the model and then the objects for our components. Like I said before, the default component. So this is the component we want to render when there is no error and we are not loading data. And the error and the loading components. Okay, and we return here a new component. So WithData is basically a factory function, so a component factory function. We pass in a couple of components and we return a new component. And this new component now has a new property, the default data property, and this is what we've seen in here. So this is the default data property. But when we take a look at what we return here, so this is the render function of our component. And here we see we render the component or the error or the loading component, and we also pass in the context attributes and the context slots. So basically what this does is that all the properties we pass to our WithData variant of the component are sent to the original version of the component, to the shopping list line item component in this case. So this is called transparent component pattern, if I remember this correctly. But it's a small detail in the whole. So let's walk through it from top to bottom. So here we have the components. We have a new prop, the default data prop. Now in here we define a state. So and this state, this reactive state variable, can now be error, idle, or loading. We start with idle. Now here we have a data fetched reactive variable or data fetched ref and the data ref. And the data ref is what we are going to pass to the component later. And this is a computed property or a computed ref that either returns the fetched data in case we already have fetched data, or whatever we pass to the default data in here. And we will see why this is useful later. Okay, but the data property is what we use at the end, and the data fetched here, we can see next, is in case there are no default data or there is no default value for data, there's no default data property, then we do nothing in this case. But if there are no, if this property is not set, then we start loading. So we change the state to loading. Then we load the data. So we send a GET request, or we trigger the GET method on our model. We will look at this in the next step. And if this is done, so this is basically the async API request. If this is done, then we go back to the idle state. And in case there is an error, we set the error state. Okay, and next here we have a helper function. I think this could be a computed property, but yeah, I didn't have time to change it to a computed property, but doesn't matter yet now. So this is a helper function which checks the current state. And then if the state is error, we return the error component. So this error param is a component. In this case, the error component, which we saw, for example, here, like this component. Or if the state is loading, we return the loading state component. And if nothing of those two if clauses matches, then we return the default component itself. And in here's the render function, the age function. Here we get the component we want to render, so either error, loading, or the default component. And we render this component, we pass through the data value. So this is now, I guess, where it starts to everything come together, I hope. Like the data value, the data ref, we spread it here. So imagine our line item model get request gives us an object like that, an object with a quantity like 1, for example, and product, and this is another product, like something like that. So the model here, let's imagine it's the line item model, returns an object with a quantity property and a product property. Like it's only an example, because it depends on which model we pass to our WithData factory function. Okay, so data value is in this case an object with quantity and product. We spread it, so what we end up with is like something like that: quantity 1 and product some object. This is the result of the spreading. So those are the properties basically. In Vue 3, attributes and properties or props are mixed. So those are passed as props. And if we take a look at the line item component again, then we see here we have the product and the quantity props. And we pass them to the values. Okay, so this is where basically those are set, like those props are set in this WithData component. Okay. And then we also bind an event listener here. Let's go back to the line item component. And in the line item component, we can see we emit an event, an update with the name update. Okay, let's go back to our WithData helper function. And here we have this on update. And maybe you are not used to writing render functions like that. If this would be a template, like with the template syntax, on update, it's basically at update. Basically the same. So, but in render functions, all event listeners start with on. So this on update listens for the update event on in this example now, on the line item component. Okay. And yeah, let's go back again to the line item component. Here we see we emit as first param the property name, like quantity, and the second one, the new value. Okay. So when we go back here, the event listener gets the property name and the new value. Now we say in the model update the key for the property. Let's take the property name, for example, quantity, and the new value. And this is a very simplified demo, but in the real world, we probably have on delete and maybe something like on refresh to fetch the data fresh, stuff like that. Okay, so this is this WithData helper function. Let's go back to the container where we use it. So let's go to the line item, WithData component. Here we use the WithData helper function we just saw. We pass in the model and the components. And now let's take a look at the model. Here we have the model, like in this case, we don't need a GET request, and this is only a demo. Empty because of demo. In the real world, you would have some API request here. And also for the update, the only thing we do here is that we log whatever is passed here in the update function. In the real world, there would be, we would do something like batch, and then our API line item our API line items and then like the ID somehow or something like that. But for now, for our little demo, we only add this console log here. Okay, so the idea is that those models are standardized, so they share the same interface. It's not the case in this little demo, because like the shopping list model simply returns an object here of line items, and has no update function. But in a real application, all those models would share the same interface, and every model would have like an update function and a get function and stuff like that. Okay, so now basically I think we have seen it all. Like, first trick is we use scoped slots so that all the side effects are triggered in this shopping list container component instead of the single components in here. And the second trick is this WithData component factory. So this WithData component factory takes care, first of all, for passing the data it fetches from an API to the components. And second, it's a standardized way for dealing with loading and error states and potentially other states as well, depending on your application. Okay, so one little thing. We talked about the default data briefly. So what we can see here, the shopping list model basically returns all the data we need. It returns line items. Line items is the data we need for our shopping list component itself. Then it returns the single line items, like this is one line item. This is what we need for our shopping list line item component. And then it returns the products as children, basically, of the line items. And the products are what we need in here for our shopping list product component. And the trick is that if we have data, we have default data, and we saw that in this case we don't fetch new data, because imagine we have a shopping list with like 100 items on it. Then if every shopping list line item component would fetch its own item by ID, then we would have 100 API requests and again 100 products and so on. So this would not be ideal and is not necessary. It's better if we have an API endpoint like for the line items or for the shopping list, and we fetch one shopping list with all of the line items and all the products, and this is all done on the backend. The backend is much faster. Making a couple of API queries or one API query with a big join is much faster than making 200 API requests. Okay, so this is the trick for not fetching every line item as a single API request, is that we pass in the default data, and if there is default data, then the WithData helper component doesn't fetch new data. But if we want to change data, we can do it in with simply emitting an update event, and the container component, ultimately the container component will deal with the update event, but in a standardized way, so that the update event on the model for example, for the items is triggered. Okay, so last thing, I guess, is to take a look at the app itself. So it's a very, very simple app. Here we have our line items, like this is the first line item with the quantity selector and the product in it, and second line item, insert line item. And now, for example, let's change the quantity of the second line item to 4. Then we see this update console log with the quantity is logged, and this is what we saw in our model. So this is basically what we define here. Let's change this so you see it, that this is really it. Change it, and now we have the new update, exclamation mark, exclamation mark, exclamation mark here. Yeah, so that it is, but that is it. Basically the concept I had in mind and I wanted to share. Let's talk again about what we achieved this way. So what did we achieve? Now all of our child components, like the shopping list line item component and the product component and so on, they are all very, very simple. All very, very simple components with no logic at all. Yeah, in a more complicated, more real-world application, there definitely would be some logic in those components as well. But the point is that they are then very easy to test. So because we don't need to deal with any side effects in our tests, we can easily test if there is any complex logic in here. Because if we don't have this abstraction or this way or this method to remove the side effects, if we have side effects in here, so if there is like for example, we have a setup hook here, and in here we have like we would import the model in here. Let's import model from, like, doesn't matter, shopping list in this case. And then we have here the model get and so on. Then if we want to test this product, it should be, if we want to test this component, or the update would be something like that. If we want to test this component, then we have to take care of the side effects triggered in here. So we need to mock the API, for example, or we need to mock the model. We definitely need to mock something because we don't want to make real API requests in our application, and we want to control what name, for example, is returned. But if we don't have all of this, then it's simply a prop. And in our tests, we simply pass the prop, whatever we want to pass this prop, what is useful for our test, and done. So it's really, really straightforward to test, and really, really straightforward to understand a component like that if you don't have to think about all this loading logic and handling errors and stuff like that. Okay, so thank you for watching, and if you want to see more like that, so I'm currently writing a book, and I had the idea for this concept when writing a chapter about decoupling and in general how to make components easy to test. So if you want to read more about that, I'm currently in the process of writing this book, so it's not finished yet, but you can sign up here on Substack and get updates whenever a new chapter is finished and whenever I release a new chapter. Yeah, so let's wrap this up, and I hope you have a nice evening or whatever time it is right now in your time zone. See you.